I rang the doorbell, pulling Heather close for a kiss as we awaited Doug's arrival. I couldn't wait to spend the night with her and ring in the new year at Doug's annual bash. The night was set to be special. Doug always threw big parties, but this one felt different. Doug greeted us with his usual grin and invited us inside. I could already tell from the cars outside that this was going to be a packed event, but the size of the crowd inside still caught me off guard. Doug quickly embraced Heather and kissed her cheek, then shook my hand and stepped aside to let us in. A maid took our coats and disappeared with them. Doug walked between us, casually mentioning how much he disliked the size of his parties, but that it was just part of his business. "Clarissa's around here somewhere, dodging all the advances from the Letchers," Doug added, his tone a mix of exasperation and humor. The evening progressed with Heather and I dancing, eating, and drinking more than we should have. The best part was knowing we didn't need to worry about getting home since we were staying the night. We were one of the few couples invited to stay, which meant we didn't have to deal with the hassle of a cab or a designated driver. I'm a successful investment broker, one of the top sellers in my office, so I knew many people at the party. Doug was right. Most of them were sleazy or worse. As a beautiful woman, Heather had to fend off advances, just like Doug's wife, Clarissa. I took the chance to network, greeting clients and pitching to potential new customers. But as the night went on, my attention kept drifting back to Heather. While I trusted her completely, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. Whenever a man got too close to her, I'd step in, and Heather would always smile at me, offering a gentle kiss and a quiet thank you for rescuing her. It was a routine that felt comforting. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin out, leaving only those staying to celebrate the new year with Doug. That's when I noticed one man who seemed to be hovering around Heather, almost stalking her. He wasn't far from her and had a look of someone completely obsessed. At first, Heather tried to ignore him, but as time passed, she lingered longer in his company. She even smiled and laughed at his jokes, touching his arm now and then. This wasn't like Heather. She didn't flirt with strangers, especially not for that long. Doug noticed me watching them just before midnight and approached. "That's Jonathan Douglas," he said, his voice filled with disdain. "He's trouble, Stan. I didn't invite him, but one of my guests brought him as her date. He's married, but separated more often than not. He preys on women, usually married ones, and he's good at it. The guy can convince anyone to do anything." Doug paused and glanced over at Jonathan, who was still closely following Heather. "You need to keep an eye on him." For the third time that evening, I approached Heather and Jonathan. As usual, he shot me a cold glare and made some smug remark when I pulled her away. This time, Heather didn't thank me. Instead, she looked at me, frustrated. "Stan, what's your deal tonight? You could tell I was enjoying our conversation. Why separate us?" "Jonathan's not like the others. He's interesting, has some hilarious stories, and he's running for mayor. He's even asked me about helping with his campaign. He thinks I could get a position in his administration, and I really need to network more with him," I replied. "I don't care, Heather. I don't trust him, and I don't want him near you." "Doug's right. He's trouble. I've heard bad things about him, and I want you safe. That job he's talking about, it sounds like it could involve more than just office work." She shot me a look, her anger evident. For a moment, I thought I had gone too far, but then she smiled and leaned in for a kiss. "Aw, that's sweet. I think you're just jealous. But don't worry, honey. You're all mine." It wasn't until later, lost in the crowd, that I realized she'd said "you're all mine," not "I'm all yours." I wondered if it was just a slip or if she was trying to tell me something subconsciously. 3 months later, I remembered that night with painful clarity. Things had been rough at home. Heather started staying late after work, attending meetings or visiting her parents. When I asked her about it, she got defensive, claiming she lost track of time or had to finish up a project. She also began volunteering for the local Republican Party, managing the office and handling public information tasks. She became a key volunteer, praised for handling the chaos at the headquarters. Like many oblivious husbands, I noticed our relationship faltering. Our love life suffered. Heather turned me down more often, and when we did have closeness, it felt distant and mechanical. Gone was the passion and enthusiasm from before. Now it felt like a duty to her, not a shared experience. One day, I confided in Doug about the problems in my marriage. His face darkened. "Stan, I'm worried. I might be the reason your marriage is falling apart. I've been hearing Jonathan's found another married woman to mess with. Word is he met her at your New Year's party. She's supposed to be volunteering for his campaign." I felt my stomach drop, the blood draining from my face. Doug noticed. "Stan, you look pale. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. Heather's been volunteering at the Republican office after work, sometimes on Saturdays. She's always late getting home and refuses to talk about what she's doing. When I bring it up, she gets angry, defensive. The later she stays out, the more distant she gets with me. She even gets violent if I try to be intimate with her. Doug leaned back, his expression serious. I'll get to the bottom of this. If Jonathan is taking advantage of my hospitality and messing with your wife, I'll make him pay. I should have kicked him out when his date left, but I was focused on being a good host. If I've caused this, I'll fix it. Doug was my best friend. I trusted him with my life. He would never hurt me. We were closer than brothers. Doug is incredibly sharp, probably more so than anyone I've ever encountered. We went to the same high school where he was the valedictorian while I barely made it into the top 10% of our class of 223. He attended college for just 1 year before deciding it wasn't for him. Doug didn't need to study and barely attended classes, yet he managed to achieve a 4.0 GPA. Instead of continuing with college, he decided to teach himself everything he could about investing and finance after taking a couple of finance courses. Doug's drive to master business and finance started when he inherited over $70,000 from his grandparents during his first year of college. Unlike most young people who might have squandered that kind of money, Doug bought a used truck but wisely invested the rest. His initial stock purchases were based on a broker's recommendations. These were the hot stocks of the moment, but the only ones who truly profited were the brokers and the firm. Doug, frustrated by this, started diving deep into financial research. He followed CNBC, read extensively, and soon opened an online brokerage account, transferring all his savings into it and began investing on his own. His very first trades paid off, bringing him much more profit than he had ever earned through professional brokers. His timing couldn't have been better, as he entered the market during the late 1980s tech boom and the rise of dot-com stocks. He made a fortune jumping in and out of many high-flying stocks, though he didn't win on every trade. Still, Doug managed to exponentially grow his wealth. As the market began to falter, Doug wisely shifted his investments to safer, more established stocks. He bought Berkshire Hathaway when it was priced just above $17,000 per share and sold it for over $72,000 3 years later. By then, Doug had become a multimillionaire and started collaborating with others in venture capital and real estate investments. After completing college, I worked as a salesman for a restaurant supply company for 4 years. I didn't enjoy the constant travel, and as my relationship with Heather grew more serious, I switched careers and became a stockbroker. Doug entrusted me with managing a portion of his investments. He did this out of friendship, though I felt guilty, knowing he didn't need my help. He reassured me that he wanted some of his investments spread across different brokerages for security and believed it might give him a head start on hearing about good deals or bad news before others. We both flourished. Doug referred many of his friends to me for full-service brokerage, and I earned money handling their trades. Doug didn't work outside of his home. He spent 8 to 10 hours a day researching stocks, trading, and living life on his terms. He tried to include Heather and me fully in his world. We attended numerous charitable events, always at his expense, though sometimes I would pick up the tab due to my expense account as a broker. Doug also took us to political events where we mingled with influential figures. We probably attended every party he hosted at his house. The Friday after Doug and I talked, we were scheduled to attend a $500 per plate political fundraiser with Doug and his companion. Doug was treating Heather and me, but for some reason, Heather was even more reluctant than usual to join us. I insisted, and to this day, I regret that decision. That evening marked the beginning of the unraveling of our marriage. When we arrived, I realized the dinner was for an incumbent state Senate candidate who was there to support local candidates. The money raised would go to the state Republican Party, with some funds directed to support local politicians. What I hadn't anticipated was that the mayoral candidate for our city would be the guest of honor, Jonathan Douglas. Upon entering, I saw Jonathan at the front of the room, engaged in conversation with several notable figures. I noticed Heather stiffen beside me, her focus entirely on him. Her expression was one of admiration, the kind a woman gives when she's completely captivated. It hit me then. I had already lost her. I asked, "What's wrong?" Heather shook her head, offering a half-hearted smile. "I didn't realize this dinner was for him," she explained, though I could tell she was lying. I said nothing, though I knew she should have known Jonathan would be there. Considering her part-time role at his campaign headquarters, it became clear to me why she'd been so reluctant to attend the event. I glanced at Doug, who was observing our exchange closely. He turned and shot Jonathan a sharp look before forcing a smile and guiding Heather to her seat, pulling out her chair. He then seated Clarissa beside him. As I walked past, Doug apologized. "Sorry, Stan. I didn't realize Jonathan was one of the beneficiaries when I invited you." I noticed Heather's reaction, though. "I hope I'm wrong, but I've got a meeting Monday with someone I want you to meet. How about lunch at 11:30? After Heather finished her meal, she excused herself to use the restroom. I noticed Jonathan quickly standing and slipping through another exit. I hesitated, then decided to follow. But Doug put a hand on my arm, stopping me. "Stan, just wait. It's taken care of. If it's her, it's already too late. Please, just wait until Monday." Later that evening, I lost track of Heather again and went looking for her after returning from the restroom. I found myself backstage behind a curtain. I overheard faint moaning and voices, one of which I immediately recognized as Heather's. A surge of anger flooded through me, and I moved towards the sound, but I tripped on a rope, making noise. I heard Heather's voice whisper, "Someone's coming. I have to get out of here, honey. We can't get caught now. I'll see you at the office. I love you." A brief kiss followed, then hurried footsteps fading in the distance. I rushed to catch up, but was too late. Jonathan and Heather were gone. As I made my way back, I bumped into Doug in the hallway. His face was stormy. He grabbed my arm, stopping me. "Damn it, Stan, I told you to hold off. My team needs time to gather evidence for you before you do something foolish. If she's really cheating, we need solid proof, so we can plan the best course of action. Right now, all you're doing is setting yourself up for failure with the legal system." Doug paused, then added, "I saw them rushing down the hall earlier. They stopped at the door to the auditorium. Heather looked around for you, and when she couldn't find you, she got nervous, telling Jonathan she thought you were looking for them. Now you've got a suspicious cheater on your hands, and getting the evidence will be harder." When we returned to the table, Doug and I made a show of it, laughing and passing a flask between us. Heather glared when I sat down beside her and asked where we'd been. At that moment, Clarissa came over and wrapped her arms around Doug. "Okay, you two," she teased. "Next time I catch you sneaking off for some drinks, I either get to come along or I'll turn you in. Now, let me have a sip from that flask." Heather seemed to relax, then turned to Clarissa. "Wait, is that what you two were up to? I couldn't find you earlier." Clarissa chuckled. "Oh yeah, I tried to catch up with them before they went inside, but as you can see, they outran me." Later, while dancing, I shared a moment with Clarissa. She melted into me, and when I tried to look around the room, she stopped me. With a gentle kiss on my cheek, she whispered, "Stan, you don't want to look over there. Just focus on dancing with me and enjoy the evening. I know what you're going through, and it's going to get worse. Just remember, Doug and I are here for you, and we'll always have your back." I relaxed a bit and kissed her back. "Thanks for helping me out earlier. I almost lost it, and Doug thinks that would have been a bad idea. I want to tear that guy apart so badly, I just don't know what to do." The next few days and weekend were difficult. I alternated between fear and anger. In my heart, I knew Heather had emotionally checked out, and it was only a matter of time before she physically left as well. We hadn't been a happy couple for weeks, and I was beginning to distance myself, unsure if she was cheating. But if she wasn't, we had other serious issues. Our connection wasn't the same as it once was. Finally, the day arrived for my meeting with Doug and his friend. I was almost certain his friend would be a private investigator. I was a nervous wreck, my stomach churning with anxiety and anger, bubbling just below the surface. I knew they could see it. Part of me feared what I might learn, but at the same time, I was desperate to find out the truth. Doug got up as I approached the table, shook my hand, and pulled me into a hug. After exchanging greetings, he introduced me to his friend Simon Hobbs, who turned out to be a private investigator. We sat down and skimmed the menu briefly to decide what to order. The waitress quickly arrived to take our order, and then Doug said, "Let's address the uncomfortable matter first." He glanced at his companion and then back at me. The investigator opened his briefcase and handed me a thick envelope. "We followed your wife and Mr. Douglas as per Mr. Bevers's request," he began. "The surveillance lasted for 20 days, starting from when we were hired until last Saturday evening. Throughout that period, we observed the subjects having lunch together daily, except for Sundays when your wife appeared to stay home. The meals took place at various upscale hotels, followed by visits to a room rented by Mr. Douglas's campaign. On 8 separate occasions, we managed to enter the room by posing as hotel staff. During these visits, neither of the subjects was dressed, and the bed showed signs of use. Photographs and other details are included in the report." Additionally, we captured audio recordings of their encounters by placing a microphone under the door. Every time they visited these hotels, they were engaged in intimate encounters. We've also documented inappropriate behavior at the campaign office and elsewhere. We have photos of them engaging in inappropriate behavior on 3 occasions at the campaign headquarters, and once when they attended a party at a local strip club with some of Mr. Douglas's associates. Perhaps the most incriminating evidence we gathered occurred when Mr. Douglas used your wife to secure the Municipal Workers Union's support. They met with Union President Stephen Negrano at the Gentlemen's Club. He appeared quite enamored with your wife. We have pictures of her sitting on his lap while he kissed her and fondled her under her dress. My operative managed to capture their conversation. Listen to this segment of the recording and then we'll proceed. Simon set a small laptop on the table and began playing a clip from the DVD. You'll be given a copy of this DVD in your report, but I want to discuss this incident with you before we finish our meeting, he said, his tone serious. My caseworker was very eager about this information, and I believe your attorney will be too. Doug and I leaned forward, our attention fixed on the screen as we watched the next clip unfold. In the footage, Heather was seated between Jonathan and Stephen. The 2 men leaned in toward her, engaging in conversation, but it was obvious that the situation was escalating. As they continued talking, it became apparent that the boundaries between them had crossed into a territory that shouldn't have been touched. Heather, who had once seemed so distant and controlled, now appeared visibly uncomfortable, yet strangely passive, as the men's actions pushed her further into a compromising position. We watched Heather shift uncomfortably, looking almost torn between protest and resignation. At one point, she hesitated, her voice shaky as she told Jonathan to stop. But he brushed off her warning, replying with a calm yet insistent tone. Come on, Heather, you know how much you enjoy this? Just relax and go with it. It's not like this hasn't happened before. Her face was filled with hesitation, but there was a clear internal struggle as though she were caught between what she knew was wrong and the pressure she felt. Despite her initial resistance, we saw Heather slowly let go of the fight, her body language shifting from tense to more relaxed. The clip showed her giving in, agreeing to spend time with one of the men, under the promise that it would help secure political support. As she finally gave in, I could hear the soft sound of her voice asking Jonathan for guidance. It was a clear moment of weakness and desperation, as though she was torn between her own morals and the situation she had found herself in. The conversation that followed confirmed it. Heather had betrayed the trust that had once been the foundation of her relationship. She had made a choice, and it was a painful one. Not just for her, but for everyone involved. At that point, the club manager approached the table. He glanced at Heather, then at the men beside her. He appeared anxious and stammered, Mr. Negrano, I've turned a blind eye to a lot for you, but I've received word that things are becoming too obvious. Lieutenant, Jones informed me that the chief has assigned some detectives to observe the club and reduce these types of occurrences. If they catch us allowing this, they'll shut the place down. Could you please either move it to a back room or take it to the hotel? This business is my livelihood. Stephen chuckled and looked at one of the larger men sitting opposite. Hey, Ralph, how about you give Joe here a couple grand for his trouble? The lady and I are heading to the DoubleTree for the weekend. Can you set up the usual executive meeting for the union? I felt my anger rising and stood up. That lying woman. She told me she was away last weekend on an emergency assignment in San Francisco for her company. Doug and Simon quickly grabbed me, pushing me back into my seat. Simon said, Please, sir, just hold on. Let me show you one more clip, and then we'll leave you to read the full report. We've got some thoughts to share, but I thought it might be helpful for you to see the footage first. My operative stopped filming at the club and called for backup. They got to the DoubleTree ahead of Stanley. After his men checked him in, he and Heather went to the bar. Our team followed them, and they managed to gain access to the suite, posing as hotel staff. They observed everything while Stanley and Heather were still at the bar. Simon added, We planted cameras and microphones throughout the suite. When Heather and Stanley returned, they were visibly intoxicated. The footage showed them entering and sharing an intimate moment. It was clear from the images that their relationship had gone beyond just a friendly encounter, confirming the affair. Simon paused the DVD and met my gaze. This was the moment the betrayal was unmistakable. The footage left no doubt that Heather had been unfaithful. But the video didn't end there. They moved into the bedroom and Heather was pleasuring Stephen. Then another shadow entered the frame. It became clear that the second man was the city services director. It was a revolting sight. I felt sick to my stomach, on the verge of throwing up. watching my wife in such a degrading situation. Once Simon shut down his laptop, he gave me a serious look and said, "Your wife remained in that hotel room until checkout on Monday. During her stay, she slept with every senior official from the Municipal Workers Union, including Stephen. They were caught discussing plans to funnel union money and use paid members to support Jonathan's mayoral campaign. Late Saturday night, Jonathan joined the others. He, the director, and Stephen were all intimately involved with Heather for most of the night. We've got photos and audio recordings of them plotting how to misuse public funds if Jonathan wins. We also have footage of Senator Nussbaum and 2 judges engaging in inappropriate behavior with both your wife and Jonathan Douglas. Our recordings reveal that Jonathan exchanged her intimate services for their public endorsements." Simon glanced at me before he went on. "The night you tried to catch your wife and Jonathan at the campaign dinner, they were literally about to have closeness on the stage. He'd already pulled her dress below her chest and removed her underwear. He had just started when she heard your voice and made him stop. That's when they ran from you. Yes, we have photos from that event, too. Honestly, it might have been better had you not interrupted. Images from that moment with the crowd visible behind them would have seriously damaged their reputations. At least you didn't cause a public disturbance or get arrested, which could have derailed your plans. We've included the complete case file for you, and we'll gladly provide a copy to your lawyer upon request. Our service fees include any necessary court appearances at the local level. That said, I strongly suggest we continue monitoring the situation for possible criminal charges. While that's generally law enforcement's job, if we supply enough proof of embezzlement and conspiracy to the authorities and the FBI, they'll be compelled to act. Besides, if you pursue divorce and she ends up in jail, you'll likely receive a far better settlement. Even though I'd braced myself for this, hearing the details still rattled me. I couldn't believe how far my wife had gone, morally, intimately, and emotionally. The evidence showed she was deeply infatuated with Jonathan. They were openly discussing how and when she'd leave me. She sounded thrilled about the job she was promised if Jonathan became mayor. More shocking was how willingly she spent the weekend at the DoubleTree, engaging in inappropriate behavior for him and his allies, acts she had never done with me and had outright refused before. In many cases, she was the one initiating it. I always knew Heather was ambitious and drawn to powerful men, but I never imagined she'd go this far. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I barely touched my food, and Doug didn't eat much either. After the investigator left, we downed a few drinks in silence. Then Doug finally spoke. "Stan, I feel completely responsible for the mess your marriage is in. I should never have let it come to this, and I want to make it right. I know I can't erase the damage, but I'll do whatever I can to help you through this. I'll find you the best attorney possible for the divorce and back you up however you need, until you feel like yourself again." I leaned back from the table and met Doug's eyes. "Then get started." Honestly, I was already close to telling her to change her attitude or we were done, even before I knew about the cheating. But now, no way in hell I'm staying with her. I still can't wrap my head around what she's done. Was she always like this, or did I just never see it? Either way, Doug, you're not to blame for her betrayal, and you don't owe me anything for that. On Thursday, Doug called and said, "Hey man, I've got someone for you. An absolute powerhouse of an attorney. She despises cheaters and always fights hard for the person who got wronged. She's especially tough on corrupt public figures and businessmen who exploit their positions. If you play your cards right, you could walk away with most of your assets and leave Jonathan's career in ashes." Doug gave me her name and number. That afternoon, I called her office to set a consultation. When I identified myself, her assistant said they'd been expecting me. She also mentioned they had tentatively scheduled me for 9 a.m. the next morning if I could make it. I confirmed and got a list of documents and information to bring for the initial meeting. The next morning, I arrived and was immediately shown into her office. I was impressed by how sharp and professional she was, and we quickly got into a productive conversation about my goals for the divorce. I looked at her and said, "Sally, I want out of this marriage, and I want to keep everything I can. I know I might not get it all, but that's the target. I also want to sue the bastard who broke up my marriage for every penny we can squeeze. I want to destroy his campaign and leave him flat broke and politically finished." Sally leaned back casually, rocking her chair slightly while thinking. After a moment, a sly grin crossed her face. "Let me ask you something. Do you want simple revenge, or do you want to financially ruin him, destroy his reputation, derail his political career, and send him to prison? If we play this smart, we can likely secure jail time. I've gone over sections of the private investigator's report already. It's explosive, I'm sorry for what you're going through, I truly am, but the evidence is devastating. We could take down most of the people involved. Legally, I'm required to report this to the authorities. They've broken multiple federal laws. If we let law enforcement act first and then proceed with the divorce, we can maximize the damage. If you file too soon, he might vanish or try to dodge accountability. I don't care how we go after him and the others who were with Heather, just as long as they suffer. Heather's clearly to blame too, but she wouldn't have done any of this without his push. From what I saw early on, he chased her relentlessly until she gave in and ended up in his bed. She wore her rings the entire time. He knew she was married. I even heard them on the audio talking about her dumb husband and scheming how to handle me once she made the break official. Sally and I worked through her questions, and I gave her the green light. I told her to prepare the divorce filing immediately. We also agreed that the investigator's report should be sent to the FBI right away to kick off a formal probe into possible campaign finance violations and misuse of union and city resources. She suggested I accompany the process server when Heather was served and confront her with a threat of legal action against Douglas. If he's like most high-profile guys, he'll try to intimidate you, maybe threaten your job, your safety, or hit you with a countersuit. But if you stay strong, I expect he'll offer a private settlement to make it go away. And if that payment comes from campaign funds, we'll have another solid charge to throw at him. Politicians like him often try to bury scandals with dirty money. Sally then opened a drawer and handed me a tiny microphone with a built-in recorder. "Keep this on you at all times," she said. "Hide the mic in your hair and stash the recorder in your car. It has a half-mile wireless range, but if you're out of range, it can store up to 6 hours of audio internally. As soon as you return to the car, it will automatically sync and download the data. If you hand me your keys, I'll have one of my techs install it in your vehicle while we finish up here." She also brought up hiring a private investigator again. "Either stick with the one you've got or let me assign someone new. Word is, your wife isn't the first married woman Douglas has gone after. And when things blow up, he's known to use illegal tactics to clean up the mess. If we can catch him planning something shady this time, we'll have him nailed to the wall." I chuckled and replied, "The PI already said the same. He's still on my payroll." The next Thursday morning, Sally called and told me, "Mr. Malone, we're ready. The divorce papers are prepped and we can serve your wife at any time. Do you still want to be present and confront her?" "Absolutely," I said. "If nothing else, I want to see the look on her face. I've been thinking, what if we serve her Friday night at campaign headquarters?" She hesitated before responding. "Stan, I wouldn't advise that. If you confront her there, the entire campaign staff will hear about it within minutes. The story would explode in the media, and Douglas would be cornered. Yes, it might tank his campaign, but it also removes any pressure on him to negotiate with you quietly. No reason for him to buy you off if he's already been publicly destroyed. I recommend waiting until she's either alone or with just him." "Fair enough," I said. "Why don't we tail them Friday night? Heather usually doesn't get home until close to midnight anyway." If I remember correctly, the PI said they meet up at the same hotel most Friday evenings. We could serve them at the hotel, maybe even catch them in the act. Sally agreed to have the process server and me show up at the hotel Friday night to interrupt their rendezvous. Later that day, when I returned to my office, 2 men in suits were waiting. They said they needed to talk about managing some inheritance funds for their recently widowed mother. I welcomed them in, and once the door was closed, they stepped forward and showed me their credentials. They were FBI agents, there to discuss my interest in Jonathan Douglas. They had already received the files from Sally and had opened an investigation based on the evidence we'd submitted. When the agents discovered that I planned to accompany the process server and record the delivery of the documents, they asked me to wear one of their surveillance devices as well. That request made me uneasy, mainly because I had hoped to quietly extract some compensation from Jonathan, a sort of personal payout. But I couldn't come up with a credible reason to decline, so I agreed to wear their wire too. That evening, our group followed the unsuspecting couple as they left the campaign office and headed toward the hotel. They departed around 7 p.m., arriving at their suite by 7:30. There were so many vehicles involved in the tale, it felt like a small parade. I genuinely worried we'd get noticed. Once they were settled inside, we waited nearly an hour before making our move. I'd brought along my camera, hoping to document the moment for personal reasons. I'm not typically interested in amateur filming, but this situation was a major exception. Just as we were about to knock, fate handed us an unexpected opportunity. The elevator chimed, and a room service attendant stepped out with a cart full of food. As he approached the suite, he glanced at us, clearly confused. I gestured toward the door and said, "Go right ahead." "We didn't mean to interrupt, mister. Douglas's dinner. We'll just give you a minute." He smiled and nodded. "No problem," he said. When he knocked, Douglas called out, "Who is it?" And the waiter replied, "Room service." The door opened, and the attendant rolled the cart into the suite. The process server and I stayed hidden nearby. When the server exited a moment later, I stepped forward quickly to keep the door from closing. Quietly, we slipped into the room, remaining just out of sight. We lingered there, waiting until the two of them began their meal before making our presence known. I was slightly ahead as we rounded the corner into view, and the sight before me hit like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd seen photos and read the PI's reports, nothing could prepare me for witnessing it firsthand. Jonathan and Heather were completely without clothes, seated at the table with plates of appetizers, desserts, and an open bottle of wine. She was perched on his lap, facing away, with him still inside her. As they whispered and fed each other, she moved sensually, her hips slowly shifting in rhythm. At times, she rose almost completely off him before thrusting back down, or she would grind in short, deliberate motions. They looked completely lost in each other. Occasionally, she turned her head to kiss him sweetly. I started filming just before we walked in. Once I gave the nod, the process server stepped forward. He cleared his throat and said, "Are you Jonathan Douglas and Heather Malone?" Heather screamed and leapt from Jonathan's lap, snatching up a hotel robe from the bed and wrapping it around herself. Jonathan cursed loudly, then stood up furious. "Yeah, I'm Jonathan. And who the hell are you? You need to get out of my room right now. How did you even get in here?" "Your room service guy let us in on his way out. Didn't you hear us ask?" "I thought I heard an invite," the server replied calmly. He walked farther in and handed Heather a large envelope. "You've been officially served." I stepped in behind him, and that's when Heather saw me. Her eyes widened. "Stan, what the hell are you doing here? And what's this about a divorce? If you go through with this insanity, I'll ruin you. You'll end up with nothing." I looked her in the eye. "No, Heather, you're not getting away with anything. You're going to sign those papers and take the settlement, or things will get a lot worse. As for Jonathan, I'm suing him for emotional distress and alienation of affection. Lucky for me, we live in a state that still allows those types of lawsuits. And with election season in full swing, that might hit him harder than anything else. Simply put, he screwed you, and now I'm going to make sure you both get screwed in return." Heather didn't come home that night. In fact, I didn't hear from her again until the following Wednesday when she called me at the office. She didn't offer any small talk or apologies. As soon as I answered, she jumped in. "Jonathan and I want to meet to resolve this. We've reserved a room at the DoubleTree for tonight. Be there at 7 o'clock. No question, no courtesy. Just a demand." I called Sally to let her know and then contacted my FBI liaison. Both strongly advised I attend. Sally said she'd be there with me, and the Bureau promised to have agents nearby in case anything went sideways. When I arrived at the hotel, I asked the front desk for the location of the meeting. They directed me down the hallway to one of the smaller conference rooms. Standing outside the door was a burly man who clearly wasn't hotel staff. I approached, and he immediately blocked me. "There's a private meeting in progress, sir." "I know. I'm Stan Malone. I'm supposed to be there." He asked for my ID, then knocked on the door. It opened a crack, and he leaned in to announce me. I couldn't hear the response, but the door shut again. The man turned back to me. "I'll need to search you, sir. Please empty your pockets into this tray." Once I emptied my pockets, one of the guards gave me a thorough pat-down. My irritation quickly built, and I demanded an explanation for the search. The guard just grinned and replied, "Well, sir, folks have tried to assassinate political figures before, and Mr. Douglas isn't taking any risks." I had a strong hunch they were checking me for a hidden recorder or wire, but I kept quiet. My hair was long enough to conceal the tiny transmitters I used, glued discreetly to my scalp. After they finished, I waited nearly 5 minutes before the door finally opened and I was allowed into the meeting. Inside, I spotted Heather seated at the table, glancing over at me. Her face was flushed, her chest red, and she looked incredibly guilty. Her thin shirt made it obvious her body was reacting, and she had that unmistakable after their time together look I'd seen plenty of times before. My blood boiled as I imagined what had just happened. As she adjusted herself in the chair, it became obvious something intimate had just happened. When I looked over at Jonathan, a wave of anger rushed through me. His smug expression and glint in his eyes said it all. He knew I'd caught on. He wasn't even trying to hide it, clearly aware I had seen more than enough. The meeting unfolded exactly how Sally and I had expected. Jonathan first threatened to have me fired, then implied I'd get hurt if I didn't agree to a more generous divorce settlement for Heather and abandon my intent to sue him and his campaign. I leaned back and spoke evenly. Listen here, maybe you and your buddies can take me out, but that won't protect you. I've made sure that if anything happens to me or my family, several packages will be mailed immediately. Even a suspicious accident will trigger them. And you know as well as I do, you can't control every news outlet in this country. Someone will publish what I have. You'll be finished. Jonathan's face turned red with rage, and I saw Heather's jaw tighten, a sign she was livid. I gave them a smile and continued. I know what just went on before I walked in, and I've got photos of similar situations. I even have recordings and images of your recent meetup at the DoubleTree with union leaders and high-level city officials. Do you think those guys will appreciate you dragging them down? If anything happens to me, my documentation includes both you and my wife. And let's be real, some of those men have serious reputations you don't want to mess with. Heather's glare was sharp enough to cut steel, and Jonathan suddenly looked queasy. He tried to sound tough. You heard me. Quit threatening and settle this quietly or else get out. I'm done talking. I stood calmly and locked eyes with him until his confidence faltered. He was struggling to keep his composure. I chuckled and turned for the exit. At the door, I paused and said, You know, Jonathan, I might think this over if Heather gave me a truly fair divorce deal. And honestly, if this city's dumb enough to elect you, maybe they deserve it. I went straight home. My private investigator and the FBI agent he'd brought along were waiting. They collected their microphones and said they'd captured everything, including Jonathan's conversation with Heather and his cronies after I left. My PI said, he had someone tailing you, told them to dig up dirt. He's definitely shaken. 3 days later, I made sure Jonathan's guy was right nearby as I called my attorney. We discussed the divorce first, and then I said, Sally, I'm done waiting. I told them what I needed to walk away, and they've ignored me. Get the paperwork ready, file the lawsuit against Jonathan, and let's go bigger. Ask for $10 million. That'll get his attention and make headlines. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw the goon following me pull back and frantically dial his phone. He was talking fast, gesturing like crazy. I just got in my car and drove home. I wasn't even halfway through dinner when Jonathan called. He didn't admit his man had overheard me, but he said, Look, we've talked it over, and we're willing to give you part of what you asked for. Heather will sign the divorce papers with no changes. She'll leave the marriage with only her personal stuff and her work pension. I'll make a private settlement if you promise this won't leak. Well, jackass, I replied, the best I can say is that I won't be the one spilling the beans. Of course, I can't speak for the dozens, maybe hundreds of people who now know you've been screwing my wife. Fine, here's the offer. You sign an NDA, I transfer $1 million into your account. No questions. Heather files the divorce as agreed. I chuckled and said, $1 million? That's laughable. I already told my lawyer to go ahead with a $10 million lawsuit. Sure, I know I won't see that full amount, but it'll take more than a measly $1 million to get me to back off. Frankly, I could make more than that from selling the story to publishers and studios. All right, he muttered. Maybe I can scrape together a bit more, say $1.7 million. I think I can cover it without too many people noticing. I'll figure out how to disguise it as campaign expenses, but that's as far as I can go. Fine, I replied. But don't expect anything from me until the funds hit my account. Here's a set of banking details, an offshore account in the Caymans. I didn't bother telling him I'd opened that account under his name using his mailing address. I was counting on federal agents eventually discovering it and tracing the money trail from his political war chest. Naturally, my plan was to move the funds out immediately once they arrived, making them impossible to recover. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. Standing there was the same guy who'd been guarding the door during my meeting with Jonathan and Heather. He held out a clipboard with a single legal sheet attached and said, Mr. Douglas asked me to bring this over for you to sign. I gave it a once-over, then looked up. It looks fine, I said, but I need to run it by my attorney before signing anything. I'm not supposed to leave without it, he said flatly. I let out a sigh and closed the door on him without another word. Then I went straight to my office and called Sally. After I explained the situation, she agreed to come over and review the document. It took her about an hour to arrive, but once she read it, she smiled and said, Go ahead and sign. 3 days later, the Cayman account showed a balance of $1.7 million. That same day, my attorney called to tell me Heather had signed and returned the divorce agreement, and it was officially filed. Since there was no contest, the divorce would be finalized in 30 days. By that point, I had already moved the money out of the Cayman account to prevent any last-ditch attempt to reclaim it. I routed the funds around the globe twice before transferring them to another offshore account under a different alias in a separate Cayman bank. Throughout all this chaos, I kept working, but my performance dipped significantly. My commissions dropped to nearly half of what they used to be, and it wasn't just the bad economy. My colleagues often had to step in and cover for me, and they ended up collecting the commissions from my clients' deals. Even after the divorce was finalized, I couldn't get my focus back. Mistakes piled up at work, and each one cost me. When I botched a transaction, I had to make it right with the client. Every single time, I was constantly watching my back, paranoid that an accident would be arranged to silence me. I couldn't shake the fear that Jonathan or his associates would one day retaliate. That fear only grew when the feds finally started taking down everyone involved. One night, as I sat alone trying to figure out how my life had unraveled so fast, the doorbell rang. It was past 9 p.m. When I opened the door, I saw Heather standing there, visibly shaken. Her face was streaked with tears, and there was a swollen red mark on her cheek that would surely bruise. She avoided eye contact and stared at the floor. "Stan, please," she whispered. "Can we talk?" I almost slammed the door on her, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what drove her to show up like this. I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. I didn't say a word as I led her into the den and sat in my usual chair. I still had the surveillance system running and wanted this conversation recorded clearly. I made sure she sat on the couch, right in the camera's view. Heather sat down, sobbing quietly. Finally, she spoke. "Stan, I know it's too late, but She paused to take a deep breath. "I want to apologize for everything I did to us. I should have known better, but somehow, he broke through my defenses. You know how I love attention and how driven I am to succeed. He knew exactly how to manipulate me, and I fell head over heels for him. It felt like he was completely in sync with me. I couldn't resist. The job he promised after the election excited me so much, I forgot what we had." Heather was crying harder now. She looked at me through tears and said, "Do you remember how furious I got at you on New Year's Eve when you tried to pull me away? You were already too late. Just before that, Jonathan and I had snuck into one of Doug's bedrooms. He convinced me to sleep with him less than 3 hours after we met. I'm so sorry. It only took 3 weeks of sneaking around behind your back before I convinced myself to fully commit to him. He swore he'd leave his wife and marry me after the election, said filing for divorce earlier would ruin his chances. I fell for the fantasy, being married to a mayor, maybe even a senator or governor someday. But after everything you did, I sensed him pulling away. And tonight, I found him in the stockroom at the office, with one of the young college volunteers. You were right all along, Stan. He fed her the same lies he once told me, promises about leaving his wife and marrying her right after the election. I confronted them and he laughed in my face. He asked what made me think he'd ever settle down with someone like me, someone he called a washed-up, broken woman with a past of betrayal and reckless behavior. Then he said if I played nice, he'd keep me around as a sort of personal assistant, let me enjoy the perks of his world. He even joked that I could entertain his top donors the way I had before. His new fling laughed right along with him. I lost control and slapped him. He hit me back. Stan, I know I've blown it, and maybe there's no undoing it, but I needed to say I'm sorry for everything I put you through. If you could ever forgive me, I'd love the chance to fix what I ruined. I always knew you were a good man, but something about Jonathan pulled me in. The dream of living large by his side clouded my judgment and erased my common sense. Heather sat there a moment longer, tears quietly streaming down her cheeks. Then she managed a small, uncertain smile, walked up beside me, and leaned down to gently kiss my cheek. Without another word, she turned and ran out of the room and out of the house. I sat stunned for a few moments, then slowly followed her to the door, just in time to see her driving away. I let out a long breath and thought how different things could have been if she had seen clearly before giving herself to that snake and the crew of powerful men behind him. I turned and went back into the den. A few days later, I realized I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Too many painful reminders haunted every corner. I put the place up for sale and hired a realtor to help me find a new one, somewhere without ghosts. I brought in movers to pack everything into storage. Another crew came to deep clean the place, and a third handled the yard. Now and then, I checked in with Doug or Sally. They told me the feds were keeping control of the investigation to prevent local interference in case any cops were compromised. They had also agreed to keep my name out of everything, and wouldn't use Sally's info unless absolutely required. Fortunately, the feds uncovered enough damning material to honor that deal. Nearly 6 weeks after I decided to sell, I woke to breaking news on every major channel. Federal agents had made sweeping arrests in connection to Jonathan's exploitation of Heather. The charges ranged from financial misconduct to corruption, illegal donations, misuse of power, and even racketeering. Jonathan himself was booked for misappropriating campaign funds, taking illegal contributions, and offering jobs in exchange for political support. Surprisingly, or maybe not, Heather was arrested too for her involvement in several violations. I phoned Sally as soon as her office opened to see what she could tell me. All she knew then was that others had leaked info, not me. That likely meant I wouldn't be linked to Jonathan or the payment he made to me. He couldn't recover the money, and if he tried to sue over the NDA, there was a strong chance I'd win, especially now that the FBI and the press were crediting 2 of Jonathan's own campaign staffers for starting the investigation. I just hope no one thought I had ratted on the union guys. The last thing I needed was a knock at midnight from some goons looking for payback. Still, I smirked at the thought of how carefully I had slipped anonymous notes and damning documents into the piles of campaign paperwork while pretending to search for Heather. I'd done it more than once. After my call with Sally ended, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I had brought down Jonathan and walked away from a faithless woman without paying a dime beyond legal costs. Plus, I was $1.7 million richer thanks to Jonathan's desperation. Now, finally, I was free to find someone truly decent and maybe even start the family I deserved.